Welcome to Theology Talks, where we explore faith, history, and the ideas that shaped our world. Today, we're diving into the religious responses to the Black Death, how Christianity and Islam faced one of history's deadliest pandemics. Let's get started. Religious responses to the Black Death. The Black Death, striking between 1347 and 1352, was the most infamous plague of the medieval era, unmatched until the 1918 to 1919 flu pandemic. Its cause was a mystery at the time and, consistent with medieval beliefs, was widely attributed to supernatural forces or the will of God. People responded with hopeful remedies rooted in religion, folklore, superstition, and limited medical understanding, largely shaped by Catholic Christianity in the West and Islam in the Near East. These efforts, however, failed to halt the spread of the disease or save its victims. Most records of the outbreak come from Christian and Muslim writers, as many Jewish works and lives were destroyed by Christians who blamed Jews for the plague. Despite these actions, the plague continued unabated, with prayers seemingly unanswered. In Europe, this contributed to a decline in the Church's authority, paving the way for the Protestant Reformation, 1517 to 1648. In the Islamic world, the plague was seen as a test or even a blessing, granting martyrdom to victims and transporting them to paradise. This perspective helped maintain cohesion in Islamic society, even though it may have resulted in higher mortality rates. While religious beliefs in the East and West shared some similarities, this theological difference shaped how each culture adapted to the crisis. When the plague finally subsided, many credited divine intervention, but its aftermath left Europe forever changed, whereas the Near East remained largely the same. The Black Death, origin and spread. The plague began in Central Asia, spreading via the Silk Road and military movements through the Near East. The earliest major outbreak, the Plague of Justinian, 541 to 542 CE, killed an estimated 50 million people and marked the disease's western reach. Historian John of Ephesus noted that Constantinople had 2 years' warning of the plague but failed to act, thinking it wouldn't affect them. Subsequent outbreaks followed a pattern of receding and resurging in the east until gaining momentum by 1218, intensifying in 1322, and raging by 1346. During this time, the Mongol Khan Janibek besieged the port city of Kaffa, modern-day Feodosia. As his troops succumbed to the plague, he catapulted infected corpses over the city walls, spreading the disease to Genoese defenders. When the Genoese fled by sea, they unknowingly carried the plague to Europe, where it spread rapidly from ports like Marseille and Valencia. Christian and Muslim perspectives on the plague. Responses to the Black Death were shaped by dominant religions and regional traditions. As historian Norman F. Cantor explained, medieval people relied on storytelling to make sense of crises. This gave rise to narratives that reflected religious interpretations of the plague. Christian views. The plague was seen as divine punishment for sin but also linked to bad air, witchcraft, and personal behavior. Christians could leave affected areas for cleaner air. The plague was considered contagious but could be mitigated through prayer, penitence, charms, and amulets. Muslim views. The plague was regarded as a gift from God, offering martyrdom and immediate entry to paradise. Muslims were encouraged to remain in plague-stricken areas, trusting God's will. It was believed the plague wasn't contagious, as it came directly from God to chosen individuals. While these were general beliefs, not all clerics or lay people agreed with them. Yet these ideas heavily influenced how communities reacted. Christian responses in practice. Christian responses included penitential processions, fasting, prayer, and charms. The flagellant movement, attempts to purify the air with fumigation or flowers. Flight to less affected areas. Persecution of marginalized groups, particularly Jews. Flagellants, active by 1348, whipped themselves in public displays of penance and led attacks on minority groups. Though later banned by Pope Clement VI, they reflected the era's desperation. Other cures, like rubbing oneself with snake parts or using unicorn horn potions, reflected religious symbolism. People carried flowers or incense to ward off bad air, a belief referenced in the rhyme "Ring Around the Rosie." Flight was common, especially among the wealthy. Ironically, this spread the plague further. Meanwhile, Jews, long scapegoated in Europe, faced horrific persecution. Despite papal decrees condemning these actions, mobs attacked Jewish communities, accusing them of poisoning wells or using magic to harm Christians. Muslim response in detail. Muslims gathered in large groups at mosques for communal prayers, asking God to lift the plague. Unlike Christian penitential prayers, these were supplications, similar to those for a good harvest or successful endeavors. Scholar Michael W. Dawes explains, there is no doctrine of original sin or insuperable guilt in Islamic theology, so prayers focused on divine mercy rather than sin. An essential part of Muslim urban life during the Black Death was communal prayer. In Cairo, for instance, people were ordered to assemble in mosques, recite prescribed prayers, and join processions, mirroring rituals like prayers for rain. Mass funerals followed traditional rites, including an orator asking God to end the plague. These ceremonies did not reference the sins of the deceased or offer reasons for who lived or died. All outcomes were seen as Allah's will. Belief in supernatural visions and signs increased significantly. In one case, a man from Asia Minor told a cleric in Damascus about a vision of the Prophet Muhammad, who instructed people to recite the Surah of Noah 3,363 times and pray for relief. The cleric shared this vision, prompting citywide mosque gatherings where people performed the ritual, prayed, and distributed meat from sacrificed animals to the poor. Another vision inspired a prayer said to lift the plague, which was copied and shared for daily recitation. While most Muslims believed the plague was sent by God, some attributed it to the malevolent power of genies. This belief, influenced by ancient Persian traditions, linked events and illnesses to evil spirits or Ahriman, a destructive deity. As a result, folk magic, charms, and amulets became more popular. These items often bore divine names or epithets, imbued with protective powers through prayers and incantations. As in Europe, wealthier individuals fled cities for the countryside, while rural residents moved to cities in search of resources. Despite a saying attributed to Muhammad discouraging travel to or from plague-stricken areas, many ignored this advice. Whether the plague was seen as a divine test or a jinn's work, fate was believed to be in God's hands, and escape was deemed impossible. For devout Muslims, the plague was often viewed as a merciful transition to the eternal paradise of the afterlife, with punishment reserved for non-believers. Unlike in Europe, there is no evidence of minority persecution during the plague years in the Near East. On the contrary, Jewish physicians were highly respected, even though they had no more success in treating the disease than others. Conclusion: as the plague continued its devastating course, people in Europe and the Near East maintained their religious practices. After the disease subsided, these devotions were credited with influencing God to lift the plague and restore normalcy. However, the perceived failure of the Christian response led many in Europe to question the Church's vision and authority, ultimately contributing to the Protestant Reformation and the philosophical shifts that marked the Renaissance. Scholar Anna Louise Desormeaux highlights a key aspect of this change, noting that Christians believed the plague was God's punishment for sin and that the only solution was to turn humbly to God, who never denies his aid. Yet, to many, it seemed God had indeed withheld his aid, leading to doubts about the Church's authority and teachings. In the Near East, no such dramatic shift occurred. Islam continued largely unchanged in belief and practice after the plague. Scholar Michael W. Dawes observes, the comparison of Christian and Muslim societies during the Black Death highlights significant differences in their communal responses. Arabic sources do not report the abnormal collective psychology or the dissociation of the group mind seen in Christian Europe. The fear and hysteria that fueled apocalyptic or messianic movements in Europe simply did not arise in the Muslim world. While many European writers of the era described the Black Death as the end of the world, Muslim authors focused more on the scale of the death toll, treating it similarly to other natural disasters like floods. In the aftermath, Europe underwent profound transformations in nearly every aspect of society: social, political, religious, philosophical, and medical. Meanwhile, the Near East experienced little change, interpreting the same catastrophe through a different lens.